Welcome back, Frank.
How you doing, man? Great to see you again.
It's kind of funny because people don't know this. Now I'm going to tell them that we had to start over again. Who
Hey,
cares, man?
but you get the behind the scenes vibe of what really happens.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to skip the Trancers story because, last time you were here, you played that Trancers song and I got me into the movie. So I went and watched a couple times. The funny thing was that I tried to tell some other people about it and I got one of the guys to watch it with me and he couldn't even last for like 15 minutes. And he looked at me like I was crazy. He's like, "You really think this is good?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do think it's good."
I mean, time traveling, horror, 80s, film noir, vehicles for madness and Helen Hunt might not be for everybody, but it checks a lot of boxes for me. I love B movies, and B movies, they either hit you or they don't hit you. And if they
Hey,
don't hit you, generally people find them to be ridiculous.
it worked for me because you
I
got me
like
to
them.
watch it. Plus, the song was great too. I
Thank
mean,
you. Yeah, I wrote the song called Jack Death about the character Jack Death, who's a time traveling cop, and he's played by Tim Thomerson, and he falls in love with a very young and sort of very young and attractive Helen Hunt around 1981. So she's got like leg warmers and like a one piece, jumpsuit and a new wave little haircut, and she's just the cutest thing ever.
well, I recognized him too when I saw him because he's like one of those role actors, that you've seen around before.
Yeah, he was in everything. Like as soon as he got on my radar through that movie, I started seeing like, oh, he's on this episode of Fantasy Island, and he's on because now it's like Tubi, and all these apps,
Yeah.
you can watch all these like 70s and 80s shows again that for a long time, like where would you watch Chips? But now it's like I turn on, like Freebie and I'm like, Chips is on, and like, oh, there's Tim Thomerson,
And all the trances are up there. I just haven't got to two, three, four, five, and six
The
yet. I think
the
there's
other
six of
the,
them.
the other best Transfers movie is actually called 1.5 City of Angels, and it was the original sequel done as a short film, and it never came out at the time. And then Charles Band put it out much later. It's only like 25 minutes long, but it's killer and has the entire cast, and it of all the sequels absolutely feels the most like the first Trancers. After that, the sequels get much more low budget and much more comedic, and there's some fun stuff, but they kind of progressively get worse. But like Trancers is great, Trancers 1.5 is great, Trancers 2 is fun. It's got Jeffrey Combs, Barbara Crampton, and then they sort of slowly start to teeter off after that. But
I'll
yeah,
go. I'm gonna go check them out.
I'm a movie nerd as much as I'm a music nerd, so
It
I
seems
go
like you
hard
might be.
on.
Seems like you might be a B movie nerd.
Well, no, I'm a movie nerd, period, but I would say I have a love for B movies, and I tend to be a guy that like, I mean, this is why I'm a documentary filmmaker, I guess, on some levels. But if I'm into something, I go really hard and to be like, I need to know everything about it, and I want to do all the research and what are these people associated with it do. So whether it's B movies, whether it's punk rock, whether it's hip hop, I mean, just whatever I'm interested in, I kind of become, essentially a bit of a armchair expert on it. But I mean, to some extent, a real expert, because in a lot of these areas, I've ended up writing books, making documentary films. And I mean, I think those are the exact things you do to become an expert in something. So mainly, I'm just kind of always seeking out like new art and new things that I love and learning how to do new stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. And I don't want to just skip past some of this because last time you here, we talked about street walking cheetahs, trading aces, Highway 61, of course, your projects with Eddie Spaghetti. And I just like saying James Williamson from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because he deserves to be there, man.
Yeah. I mean,
Definitely.
believe me, no one's more blown away by the fact that I sing with James Williamson than me. I mean, my band's called the Streetwalking Cheetahs. We're named after a line in a Stooges song. Our sound was kind of, essentially inspired by the Stooges and certainly some other bands. But James's guitar playing, music, and overall attitude has had a lot to do with my approach to rock and roll, certainly. And I play different types of music, but when I'm doing rock, you can hear that influence. So at some point when I met him and he kind of tapped me to be the singer of his new band, I was sort of pretending along the way, like, oh yeah, sure, James, that'd be terrific. Yeah, no problem. I get those kind of calls all the time. And then like, I'd hang up or leave the room and be like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I can't believe it. Wow. And then I would just go in and show up and try to do my best like anything else. I mean, the bottom line is however you get the gig, once you get a gig, like you better show up and bring your A game or you don't get gigs like that. So
Yeah.
I feel like whatever I do, whether there's money involved, fame involved, none of that involved, whether it's just something I do because I'm interested or it's because it means something to me. But I'm always going to come in guns blazing and really bringing everything I got.
Yeah. And for you folks listening, Frank has few books: On the Road with the Ramones, When the Wall of Sound Met the New York Underground, the Ramones, Phil Spector, and End of the Century, and a Van Halen book, which I'm really.
I've written a bunch too. I ghost wrote I was one of several ghost writers on Dave Mustaine's first book, and I also did a book with Walter Yost Jr., the sports photographer. I also did 2 books on parenting, Diaper Dude and From Dude to Dad.
I saw that.
And I feel like there's another one in there. But anyways, I wrote a lot of books.
Are you a dad?
Yeah. I have a 20-year-old daughter. She's in college. She's a biology major. Can you believe it?
What college?
UC Santa Cruz. She's a slug, a banana slug.
Yeah, it's nice.
That's their
nice
mascot is the banana. I don't want anyone to think I'm calling my daughter a slug. The banana slug is their mascot. So it's anyone that goes there, if you say, hey, I go to Santa Cruz, banana slugs,
I wanted to talk about your background because I know you worked for Fender for a long time in Tonal, and before that NBC, and you also directed another film, Story of Chron. Why don't you just give us a summary of how you got into that part of the industry where you were directing film and working on film and video?
Sure, and it actually ties, as you'll see, directly to this film, the exact stuff you're talking about. So basically, I've been a musician my whole life, but the way that I kind of made my living, because being a musician does not, I don't know if you're aware of this, but being an artist doesn't pay that well. So unless you strike gold, there are folks that get to that other level, but most of us, you just keep on figuring out how to just kind of stay in the game and do your thing and make the art you want to make, and hopefully making a living off it, and maybe a good living, maybe a bad living, maybe most of us, have other things we do to sort of bring home the bacon, as they say. For me, I always stayed in show business, but sort of on the other side of the camera. So I was a writer for a long time, and the writing took me into working at a TV network, NBC, where I was a digital content producer. And essentially that meant I was working for their network, the G4 TV network, which was a video game tech themed, pop culture themed TV network that was out around for about 10 years. And I was a digital producer there. And then I was at the Esquire network, which was another one of their networks. And I bopped around between Style Network and E in between. And so I was doing that for over a decade of my life while I was doing the Street Walking Cheetahs, while I was writing all those books. This was sort of my day job. And part of that was like coming up with ideas like, hey, we've got this show, in this case, we had a show called Attack of the Show. And they were like, it's a pop culture show. We have bands on, we have musicians, we have actors, what could be some cool digital content that could sort of like feed into that? And, and I'd suggested, well, at that time I was starting to make hip hop beats just on my own with Bruce Duff, actually, from the Street Walking Cheetahs.
Oh yeah.
He and I were just sort of doing that for fun. I've always been a huge hip hop fan, but it wasn't the music I played, it was just the music I listened to for the most part. And so I had this idea of like, what if I brought in rappers and kind of had them freestyle, or at least use that as sort of a conversation jumping off point. And then, have them talk about sort of what they do as rappers from a technical sort of musical standpoint, and then come and do that on the mic. And I realized that not every rapper was going to be a great freestyler, but I kind of also realized that every rapper started off just spitting rhymes, and before anyone's a great lyricist, they're just beatboxing and tapping on walls, or doing little battles and ciphers with their friends, just the way that guitar players do. But I was like, but people talk about, we'll ask Eddie Van Halen questions for days about his technique and why are you putting your hand here, and tell me about harmonics. No one ever talks to great rappers about like their technique. It's all about like, getting shot and selling drugs and all the sort of like, like lifestyle stuff that may or may not feed into the music. But I didn't feel like there was a lot of conversations going on about the sort of musical complexity of what was going on there, especially if you talk to, the kind of lyricists and freestylers and rappers that I was talking to. So they went for it. I shot a couple episodes. They did really good on the website. And soon the TV show started airing them as little bumpers. So suddenly this web content I was making was like, on TV. And I was getting really big artists. So now I was, at first, the very first episode I shot was with Devin the Dude out of the South. Then I shot Killah Priest, then Bus Driver. And these guys are a little bit more underground. But within a few episodes, I had Razkaz, I had Sean Price, I had Terminology, like, okay, a couple levels up. Then all of a sudden I had Cypress Hill, Wu-Tang Clan. I had, Fat Joe, MOP, Mobb Deep, Ice-T, Del the Funky Homo Sapien, Tech Nine, Insane Clown Posse, Freestyle Fellowship guys. Like I literally, the Alcoholics, like all these like major artists were coming through and telling me their story about how they got into rapping and answering questions and then getting on the mic and doing it. And I got 110-ish interviews with amazing artists, big, medium, small, talking about the same subject matter essentially, and delivering musical performances. And so I decided to pitch the network on like, let me make this into like a TV special or, documentary, but, we were a TV network, so it would have been aired on TV. And they went for it and they gave me a little budget and said, okay, go shoot some more stuff. So I decided that I would probably need to follow 2 rappers around and like a newer guy influenced by freestyling and a newer guy from the battle scene, and I'll talk to you about that in a second. So I followed Open Mike Eagle and Iron Solomon around. At that time, there was a third rapper who had appeared on my show and I had a long history with, who was also part of the film, and this ties into the other film question, which was Hellrazah. Hellrazah was a Wu-Tang Clan affiliate, and I had worked with Hellrazah back when I was fresh out of college. My first gig in show business was I was a publicist, but I was like an assistant to an intern, an assistant, a junior publicist, a publicist. Then all of a sudden I was second in command of a publicity team at a record company. And the artist signed to that label, one of them was, we had Cheap Trick, we had Love and Rockets, we had Salt and Pepper, we had a bunch of cool bands, but we had Sons of Man, which was a Wu-Tang Clan offshoot with this guy, Hellrazah. And they had just been signed. Hellrazah was like 22 years old. I was maybe 25 years old. Both of us just in show business. Same with Killah Priest, his bandmate. And we all kind of came in it together. And so he was my buddy. So years later, when I'm at NBC and I'm at Chief 4 and I'm doing this podcast interviewing rappers, again, one of the first guys I called was like, hey, I know this guy from Wu-Tang. Let me call Hellrazah. I called Prodigal. So that's why Killah Priest was the second guest ever, because like I knew him. You know what I mean? I could get him. So I always had that affiliation with those guys from way back when. So Razah came on the show when we went to New York. And when I pitched the idea of it becoming a documentary, the idea was like, I'm going to follow more of an artsy indie backpacking West Coast rapper, because they kind of come from like the freestyling of it all being improvisational. And on the East Coast, I'm going to follow this battle rapper, and because the battling thing is different. But I kind of wanted there to be a third guy, and Hellrazah was like my homie. So I was just like, well, and we'll have Hellrazah in the film. Hellrazah has a brain aneurysm and then loses the ability to rap. And when I went out to visit him, it was like way more serious than he had kind of let on. And I was like, oh my God, like this isn't like this story that he's going through isn't like an element of a film about freestyling. Like this is a film. I mean, this is a whole story. Like, if I were to get involved with sort of showing my friend going through this longer arc of a rehabilitation process and sort of shine a light on his whole situation. So what happened is that like one of the stars of my film has a brain aneurysm, and then NBC pulls the plug on the entire G4 TV network, and I lose the rights to all footage, including that first interview with Hellraiser after the brain aneurysm, because I was still at NBC then, and including his appearance when he first, when he came on and did the show, and all the freestyle stuff and everything. Like, we lost it. So I decided that I didn't need them to tell Razah's story. And if I lost a few interviews, fuck it, I would just shoot more interviews. You know what I mean? So I just kept shooting on my own dime. Me and Rob Juster, who was my boss at G4, we just decided on our own, like, we're just going to keep doing that. So we did that. And then many years later, we negotiated the footage back from NBC. So at that point, I now had content for 2 films. So we finished the Hellraiser movie. It came out, Risen, the story of Chron, Hellraiser Smith. It came out in 2020, like 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. Crazy.
Ouch.
And then I started working on collecting all the footage from the Freestyle 101 podcast and the other stuff that I'd shot right before the network collapsed, with like Razah right before and right after the aneurysm, and Open Mike Eagle and Iron Solomon. I just started shooting sort of all those other elements when they pulled the plug. So I kind of, over the pandemic and up until recently, was reassembling that film, and that's what you see now. So the film Freestyle 101, which doesn't have Razah in it now because that became another film, but it does have all the rappers I mentioned before. It's narrated by Chuck D. It stars Ice-T, Open Mike Eagle, Iron Solomon, and just, tons and tons of incredible rappers. And so that's sort of a time capsule piece between the hip hop content I was shooting on that subject matter between 2008 and 2015. And that's what this movie is. So it's really kind of just a collection of a body of work that I and these other artists did about the subject matter that's kind of a hip hop in this period.
Wow, I could almost say thank you, and it was nice talking to you because you covered so much there.
I learned that from David Lee Roth, who I interviewed many times. Is that, like, you ask one question, you just tell the whole goddamn story.
One thing you said a while back that I love that Ice-T talked about in the film is the difference between a recording artist and a freestyler. And I'll get to that in a second. But the film is, I'm just going to read some of my notes here. It's a film, a lesson in, because I know a little bit about rap and hip hop, but nowhere as much as you do. I'm like way behind. So I'm learning as I'm going along here. The film is a lesson in hip hop history, as well as an inspirational guidebook on how to survive in the music industry. You follow New York battle rapper Iron Solomon and LA indie rapper Open Mike Eagle as they discover firsthand. Film Threat magazine said, through a series of interviews with highly regarded MCs and industry insiders, as well as a plethora of archival footage, which you talked about, and yes, mind-blowing rhymes, the filmmaker delivers a first-class account of underappreciated art form. And I was going to ask you how you got into rap to start the whole thing up. You kind of talked about that, but when you were young, were you just listening to rap? And do you remember when you first got into it?
Well, when I was a kid, you kind of couldn't, it was like the early MTV days. So you couldn't escape groups like Run DMC, DJ Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince and Fat Boys. And so that's really all I knew of hip hop early on in my days, was just whatever hits were being played on the radio or on MTV. And I certainly loved Run DMC. I mean, they were the one rap group that second I heard them, I loved it. And I was a big Aerosmith guy. So when I heard them do Walk This Way with Aerosmith, I was just like, all right, like that. I love everything about this. And Run DMC were just kind of cool. They were like, had this rock star vibe, but also very street. So, but that was really my only exposure to hip hop, would be that. What turned it for me is, so my stepdad was an entertainment attorney, and he represented generally rock and roll people, Tom Petty, Yoko Ono, people like that,
Wow.
and Green Day at one point later on. He was representing Eazy-E in the case where D Barnes, the host of a video show called Pump It Up, filed assault charges against Eazy-E and Dr. Dre for she brought up Ice Cube to them in an interview right after he'd left the group, and they were not happy about that, and they've certainly roughed her up. And so she had a lawsuit against them, and my stepdad was representing Eazy. So he went to a meeting with Eazy and came home with a stack of records from Ruthless Records on priority, and was like, hey, this rapper I'm working with, Eazy-E, just gave me all this music from his label. It's not my thing. Check it out. And my first thought, because I wasn't necessarily a big hip hop guy, was kind of like, great, I'll go down to the record store and sell these CDs and get like, $25, go buy some weed or something. But then I did know that NWA had that song "Fuck the Police." It was right. This was right when America's Most Wanted came out, and the first NWA record was out, Straight Outta Compton and stuff, and right around Ice-T's Lethal Weapon record. And so just to give you the era. And so I thought, I do overall support the sentiment of "Fuck the Police." I probably should listen to this song. So I put it on, and it was just kind of one of those game-changing moments for me. Like, just like when, as a guitar player, I heard Eddie Van Halen, where I kind of was like, oh my God, stop everything. I have to do this thing. With hip hop, it wasn't like with guitar where I went, I have to do this. I never thought I was never like going to be a rapper. But the music made so much sense to me. I was so into like rebellious music, and I loved punk rock, and I
Yeah.
loved heavy metal, and I loved anything shocking. And at that time, hearing NWA and Ice Cube, and I think Above the Law was in that stack. And then I quickly jumped into Public Enemy and Ghetto Boys and Ice-T, of course. And I just couldn't get enough of this music. It was so high energy to me. It was so punk rock. They didn't even have guitars. Like, what's more punk rock than that? Like, fuck a guitar. I just was absolutely transfixed with this music. And then, of course, that led me down into all the other, and this is the golden era of rap, they call it now, early 90s. So Tribe Called Quest, Beastie Boys. And Beastie Boys, by the way, is another group that I had heard early on and that I was a fan of. Like, I had License to Ill. That's probably that, and Raising Hell were probably the two hip hop cassettes that I had before I got really into the music. But anyways, now I was just getting into everything and really becoming as nerdy about hip hop as I was for rock. But I wasn't one of those kids walking around in baggy jeans and turning my cap around. I just I loved the music, and I just felt connected to it. And that was kind of enough for me. As I went on into production and stuff, like I said, then later on, I had met some rappers along the way, guys like Hellraiser and stuff, who, it just sort of seemed like my direction into sort of becoming a storyteller in the hip hop world had this path where all these little kernels were happening. It's like, I heard this music through this, Eazy-E connection, and then I meet this Wu-Tang guy, and then I'm a musician, but then at one point there's a horrorcore group out of the West Coast named Insane Poetry, and I got hooked up with them, and I was working with them early on. I met some rappers out of Texas, this guy K Reno and this producer named Dope E, who were affiliated with Ghetto Boys, and I did some work with them. Or just all these sort of things kept leading me towards like, you're a filmmaker, you're a musician, you love hip hop. And then when the Hellraiser thing, and with his condition of tragedy that struck him, and me being at NBC and making this podcast, it just sort of set me up for having all this content and now all these stories to tell.
Eazy-E is a great place to start, because Straight Outta Compton was what got me interested in early rap. I too, Public Enemy, Run DMC, NWA. And then the next band that I ended up liking was Cypress Hill, and for obvious reasons.
And Be Real and DJ Muggs are both in my movie.
Yeah, Be Real was great in the film.
We actually shot Sen Dog too. He just, didn't make the final cut, simply because, like I said, I shot 110, no, more than that. That's just for the show. Altogether, probably 120 rappers were shot in terms of this body of work that I did. But I couldn't put that many people in the film, or it just would be a 3-hour film. So at some point, I had to kind of whittle it down.
A couple of questions for you. One is, how did you get Chuck D to do the narration? Because he's great. And then I was going to ask you about the process of setting up interviews, but you kind of covered that already. So talk about Chuck D, because I think it's really important when you do a documentary that you have the right guy as the narrator, and he's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, the way the podcast was is at that point I pretty much did everything. So I made most of the beats. Me and Bruce Stuff at least made most of the beats at first. Then it became so overwhelming that I had to bring in some other beat makers, but we kept all the music in house. I was booking all the artists. I was booking the studio time, getting the crews from my NBC people and stuff. And then I would go back and edit and audio mix and put together the whole, and then upload it to the website. So I mean, I don't want to say it was a one-man band, because obviously I had camera people and sound guys and engineers from the studios, and of course the artists and stuff. But definitely there was a lot of things. Like, I didn't know how to book artists, but it was sort of like, well, yes, if you want to do this show, go get artists. And I'm like, okay. So after, doing it 110 and change times, then suddenly I knew, like, okay, here's what you gotta call this guy, with Chuck. So that led me, by the time I got to, like, okay, now we've got some structure of a film here, let's start getting some narration happening. It was the same kind of thing. I just sort of knew, well, you got to track down whoever his manager and or publicist and or agent is, depending on what kind of request you're making. And I reached out to them and I gave them a pitch, just sort of like I did with everyone else. And I don't think I had an in, like, there was some people, like, I got to Ice-T because I knew Ernie C from Body Count. And you know what I mean? And there was like there would always be, like, I met Prodigy from Mobb Deep, and he, like, was like, you could use my studio for 2 days, and he helped me book some artists. Like, guy was the nicest guy in the world. Like, Sean Price I met, and he just was like, hey, let me hook you up with the studio I know when you come to New York. There was just people I'd meet that would just be really like, hey, we like that you're doing this idea. No one talks to us rappers like we're fucking musicians. So, like, I know some other rappers that might be interested in being taken seriously. You know what I mean? So, like, it kind of started rolling. So I think, though, with Chuck, that I just tracked down management and put together a passionate letter that I
And he
wrote
liked it.
myself. Yeah, I didn't have like a publicist or anyone write it for me. I just wrote and I explained why I thought that this was an important story in hip hop, and that why I thought this era of hip hop and letting people know about the history of hip hop, through this lens, was important for, like, historical reasons. And at that time, I mean, there's been a lot, in the last many years, there's been a Netflix show, there's other things about the history of hip hop, but at the time I was pitching him, there wasn't really a lot of that. And Chuck himself, like, he told me he loves documentaries. So generally he wants to do documentaries if the subject matter is something he's passionate about. He loves sports, and he loves hip hop, and he loves, music. I mean, he's a music fan. So he's kind of open to it.
I could totally relate.
Man, I spent 2 days in the studio with Chuck D, having him read
Yeah.
my words.
I got to meet him a few times. He's a great guy. I love documentaries myself, and I can watch a documentary about a band that I don't even like. So it was easy for me to watch this. I love how you decided to make Open Mike Eagle. I love his whole DIY vibe, the way he talks. And then Iron Solomon, the two guys that you picked to make the key dudes in it, they're both in their own way were fantastic. I mean, I watched a bunch of Iron Solomon's freestyle things. It's like you wait for a brawl to break out, but one never breaks out.
It's verbal boxing, and it sometimes gets damn near close to actual boxing.
But those two right there, I mean, the fact that you made them, besides watching Iron Solomon's duels, there was a Open Mike Eagle on Tiny Desk Concert. I love Tiny Desk Concert, NPR, and I watched that too. And I was like, these guys are really talented, both of them. And you picked the right people, without a doubt.
You. Well, they're both really great artists and very nice, likable people. And it's always obviously great to be working with people that you actually enjoy, their company. And both those guys are really good dudes. That being said, they're both incredible rappers. So even if they weren't good dudes, I would have followed them around because they're both charismatic guys with interesting stories and interesting backstories, and they both are in sort of like the top of their field. And what I discovered doing this, exploration of this genre is that like freestyling, which essentially, if for folks that don't know, it just means improvisational rap. So
Yeah.
rapping off the top of your head and rapping based on sort of what you're seeing in that moment. However, as it became kind of a craft, two variations of it kind of began. On the West Coast, it's all about straight up improvisation. So you can't come in with any pre-written, you can't use raps that you already had in your, in your songs or your war chest. You can't come in having like pre-written punchlines, because generally the scenarios where you would be doing this would be at clubs or battles, places like Leimert Park and stuff in Los Angeles, where like your audience is going to be other competitive rappers, and they know in a heartbeat if you're faking or you're real, or if you're too smooth or pulling out too many complicated. People are like, man, this guy's fucking trying to pull these writtens off like it's a freestyle. Like, you can't bullshit the greatest MCs in LA. And the greatest MCs in LA are hanging out in Leimert Park waiting for your punk ass to show up and try to fucking cross the line and pull some bullshit off. So in LA, and it started with, there was a spot called The Good Life, which was off Crenshaw right near Leimert Park. Then it moved into a situation called Project Blowed, which was sort of a collection of MCs. And now there's like a club, and or a few clubs around Leimert Park doing sort of open mics and battles and ciphers and stuff. And so there's always a version of it. But that's the scene out here. On the East Coast, what you got was battles. And in battles, much like boxing, like, you have to come prepared or you're going to get your ass whooped. So you have to maybe know that this guy who's saying he's a hard ass drug dealer actually went to private school. You have to know that, he dyes his hair, this, that, or this, because you're going to need to call him out and embarrass him. And that's because those
It
punchline
gets
moments are
heavy.
what,
It gets
yeah,
heavy.
and people, and it'll get racial and it'll get sexist and it'll get homophobic. Like, these guys don't give a fuck. They are there to humiliate and annihilate you. And so, but also there is an element of improvisation with that too, because if you're coming in to a battle and all your shit's written and you can't react to the moment, then you're gonna not win that
You're in
battle.
trouble.
Because what if this guy just completely knocks you off guard and calls out some shit that you didn't like? You better be able to go and like figure out a fucking response to that, or it's like done, because you're getting judged on points and audience reaction. Or another situation would be like, let's say you guys are both going, and in the middle of you, some guy in a SpongeBob t-shirt starts, drunkenly, like, if you can't capture that moment in your rhyme and work that in somehow, then people are like, how do you let that moment go? Like, this dude in the SpongeBob t-shirt just, called you a mama's boy and you didn't react in your improvisational rhyme. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, in the battling thing is kind of a mix of like pre-writtens and homework and punchlines combined with being able to improvise and work with the moment. So Iron Solomon was like, when we did this movie, the top guy. Him and a few others were out there battling, but he was certainly in the conversation of like the top guys in the battle scene, still is. And Open Mike Eagle was the guy kind of breaking out of the Leimert Park freestyle scene. So those two seemed like great guys to follow, and I had met each of them, and they were both really cool dudes, and they were into the idea. But also I wanted to also explore the idea of just like, okay, you got this incredible talent, but like, now what does it mean in the record industry? It's like, so you're the best gunslinger in town, but like, does that get you a record deal? Can you make money doing that? If you put out a song, can you get a hit being known as that guy? And so they each have their own version of kind of that struggle, essentially.
And I like how Ice-T pointed that out in one segment in the film when he said, just because you're a good recording artist doesn't mean that you can be a freestyler too. It's like two different worlds. The scene I really enjoyed that kind of put that perspective to me about how you have to be able to ad lib was Supernatural, when people were handing him shoes and all this stuff, and he was just going along with it. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, he holds, I mean, I don't know if he still does, although I can't fathom anyone has beat him, but at the time when we did the movie, he held the Guinness Book of World Record for longest rap, and it was
9 hours, right?
yeah, 9 hours, and they would give him pee and water breaks, for a few minutes here and there, but again, all has to be off the top. And part of that, and part of what he does as kind of a living, and like his take on being an MC and kind of what he's known for, is that like people are just passing him stuff, they're pointing at their t-shirts, they're passing him business cards, pens. He's like, in his raps, he's like, so pass up stuff, their phones, whatever, and he's working in all the stuff he sees, and that's how his brain works, because he's got to be like 5 rhymes ahead thinking of stuff. So I mean, that's why, going back to the original reason why I started interviewing all these artists, is just like the first few times that I always had an admiration for hip hop and for writing, and I'm a songwriter myself, so all that stuff kind of made sense to me. But the first few times I saw people freestyle, I just kind of couldn't believe it. It was watching like Carlos Santana improvise or something. I was just like, how is this happening right now? How are you thinking that fast? So when you see someone like Supernatural, who can just go and go and go and go and go and use everything you could, every possible rhyme in the entire lexicon of the English language must be in this guy's brain, and he's just ready to go. Like, I mean, it's mind-boggling. And in the movie, we actually interview this guy, Dr. Charles Lim, who was doing experiments on what the brain does when it's improvising versus
John
when
Hopkins.
yeah. Well, it's like when you're reading something, or you're going through the motions of what your brain already understands it should do, as opposed to when you're sort of free thinking and freestyling. So he interviewed jazz improv players and freestyle rappers, and saw that the brain was doing very different things, and it was essentially unifying the left and right side of the brain in ways that were not being unified when you're just reading or sort of going through the mental motion, so to speak.
I found that part of the film fascinating because John Hopkins University is one of the premier, universities for science, and the fact that you got a guy like that in the film was fantastic.
Yeah, I just thought that that was another thing, like, that wasn't shot for the podcast. That was shot when we knew we were going to go make a movie out of this thing.
Right.
And I thought, like, well, you can't, I mean, I like that I have 100 and something artists talking about this, but it can't just be constant talking heads. There has to be some people that we follow around and get into their stories and lives. But also, I wanted to get a little bit deeper into this idea of just what really is freestyling in terms of what it's actually doing with the human brain. And it's a rapper in the movie named Razah who summarizes to me kind of like the whole movie in one sentence. He goes, "Life is like a freestyle." And that, I kind of couldn't get that out of my head after he said that. And, that's why I kind of wanted to really explore not only the artistry, but the life side of it, by following these artists and by talking to doctors and researchers about, like, really making you understand, like, what the brain does, the choices that you're making, how it's affecting you psychologically, biologically, and artistically.
Was it your idea for Iron Solomon to go to Biggie Smalls' home, or was that something that he came up with?
It was more that, so Mike Eagle and myself and, other members of the cast all live in LA. So I always felt, and I was always cognizant of the fact that, like, don't you dare tell a story about the formation of hip hop on any level and not have New York
The roots
majorly represented. This can't just be LA people. So I made a bunch of trips to New York to make sure I got that covered. But I always had more access to the LA guys. So with Mike Eagle, he was the first guy when I knew we were going to go start to tell these other stories and make this a larger project. I had interviewed Mike when he was in a band called Thirsty Fish, and they were one of the early guests because Micah Nine from Freestyle Fellowship, who is dazzling in our film, he recommended, he's like, go hook up with these kids, Thirsty Fish. They're monsters. They're monster freestylers. I was like, well, shit, if Micah Nine says you're a monster, you must be a crazy ass monster. So I brought them in, and they were monsters, and they were great, and I really liked them all, and I really liked Mike, and we just stayed in touch. And so when the idea of making this into a larger thing came up, he was like the first guy I called. I just knew, like, you know, he's a good dude. I like him personally. Great example of a really good freestyler, but he's also a younger cat. So maybe, you know, a lot of the guys I was interviewing were like OGs and stuff. So I liked that he was a younger cat, and he was local, and I could get to him easily, and he was into it. So we did a lot of stuff. And what it's almost like what I did with Mike and ended up informing what I should do with Solomon, which is answers your question. So Mike took me to Lamert Park. Mike took me to where the good life used to be. Mike introduced me to folks that became integral to the film. Then I also, because of Mike and Nine, met Peace and AC Alone and other people from Freestyle Fellowship. They were getting involved. Peace took me to an actual tour through the building that, you know, it's now like a little medical establishment. But back then it was a club called the Good Life. So it's like I had all these like guys from the area showing me all this stuff, and like, here's the club that it all started from here in LA, and here's the street that we went down to get, and here's the park, and blah blah. So by the time I was going to New York, I was like, well, I know I got to have Iron Solomon show me where he's from, the club where he came out of, and walk me through some of his influences. And when I say walk me through, meaning take me over there. If, you know, if Biggie's your guy, well, I know it's not far. You're in Brooklyn, he's Brooklyn. Let's go to his part of Brooklyn. You know what I mean? So it was kind of more just like I had done all this stuff with Mike, and I was happy with the way that was coming out. So I thought, well, let me go with my New York guy and kind of do the New York version of this, and then I'll have sort of like two linear sort of storytelling devices, essentially.
You nailed it. So by the time this show comes out, the film will be on Amazon Prime, Google Play, YouTube Movies. Is it going to be in any theaters? Are you doing any openings or anything like that?
Not at the moment, but we certainly might. I mean, the way that this thing goes, I'll tell you, there's so many weird things about making movies these days. So, you know, a movie like this, a small documentary, even though we have big people, I mean, The Game is in this movie. It's narrated by Chuck D. Like, there's major artists in this movie. But at the same time, we're telling a very specific story about rap, and it's sort of a time capsule from a few years back in a lot of ways. And so Netflix and those big distributors, they're not picking up movies like this. It's just the way it is. So you end up essentially doing these indie distribution deals, which are great because you can get out there and you're still getting on all these major platforms. But theatrical releases for these kind of movies essentially are not an option unless you just rent the theater. Now, yes, you could do screenings and stuff. However, the way that this digital distribution works these days, like when I first started getting into this game, you would get like at least like a 3-month lead time or a month lead time before you, like, hey, your movie's coming out in March, and you're like, oh, it's January. We've got 3 months to like set this up. Now it's like they're like, your movie's out on Friday. We're like, what? You know what I mean? Like meaning we have had so little lead time before we were given our release date after we handed in the film. We just kind of was like, all right, I guess we're not going to do any screenings. Like, it's time to just get the word out. And you know what I mean? Because screenings, you have to book theaters ahead of time, and you know, you can't just pull it off in like a week or two. And I don't know that that would be the best use of our time at this point.
It's kind of like this podcast. I might call you later and say it'll be out tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So it's a weird thing. And then the other thing, and this is, I'll tell you this, is that if you or anyone watching this, if you are so inspired, and I hope you are, to watch the movie, you watch it on Amazon Prime, leave a review. The way that the things are set up now is that, like, when your movie goes on Amazon Prime, they're charging, you know, $3, $4, $5. That revenue stream is literally the only revenue stream virtually that a film like this has, and it's determined on the amount of clicks, you know, views, who watch, and the reviews. So if in a month you haven't gotten a certain amount of reviews and a certain amount of clips, you're out of the paywall and you're a free one, which is fine, because like as an artist, I go, hey, if it's free, then more people will watch it. However, all the people that invested any kind of money, and we're not guys that went after big investors, we basically did this ourselves, but it sure would be nice to throw some money towards like anyone else, and you know, that was involved in this film, some of the artists, blah blah. But like when there's a month of and in the streaming revenue stream, like it's like literally the entire film will make a penny if you watch it once. And we've got a month to rack up those pennies. It's crazy. So leave a review, because you think like, oh, it probably doesn't matter. It totally matters. It literally changes like how long the film can stay behind this wall before it moves to a different tier. And that's kind of how all of those digital platforms are these days. It's the same thing with streaming and stuff. I mean, streaming music, you know, I'm in the music game too. The ability to monetize that is so difficult, and then what you're monetizing is such a fraction of what it used to be.
Yeah.
That's where I go back to, like, if you're an artist, you better love what you do, because you know you ain't in it for the money. You know what I mean? Like, you got to just figure out a way to keep doing your art and essentially paying for it yourself, or finding enough to, you know, sort of like distributors and outlets, or people to back you, or people to, you know, revenue sources or ways to alleviate the cost. But the idea that, like, I'm going to sign to a record company and they're going to give me a $20,000 advance, like, that shit ain't happening no more. The idea that, like,
Oh,
I'm going
I
to go
know.
make a movie,
Yeah.
and, you know, some big production company is going to throw me down like a couple hundred G's a couple. No, people don't do that anymore. Not for small movies, like, not for documentaries. You know what I mean? So you just
Well,
kind of got to go, like, I got stories to tell, I got art to make, I got paintings to paint, I got music to make, beats to make, songs to sing, and you just go do it. Because if you don't, I'll quote my friend Pat Todd from the Lazy Cowgirls. I said to him, I was telling him basically, like, man, you know, it's so great. You and I have known each other forever, been playing music like this, and, you know, we just love do it. And he goes, Frank, I do this because if I don't, I'll die. And he was dead serious. And that hit me hard. And I was like, me too. So I do this, I make these movies, I make this music because I do this, because if I don't do it, I will die, Rico.
you can add me onto that list, because if I do, hey Frank, I'm really excited. I watched the film twice. I'm gonna tell people about it. You did a great job, man.
Thanks, man. I
And
really appreciate it.
and you know, everything you do, man, your heart's in it, and you're making art. You're making art. You're doing it. You're doing it for the art, and I appreciate that very
Thank
much.
you. Appreciate that. I appreciate that you appreciate that.
Okay, I'm gonna go watch another episode of Trancers now,
Yeah, man.
and I'll hear
I'll just
back from you in a few months, and we'll talk about your next project.
let you know that, you know, like you said, on the 24th, it's Amazon Prime, Google Play, YouTube Movies. You can also go to www.freestyle101movie.com. You can also find us on all the social medias at Freestyle 101 Hip Hop History. And you know, I've been putting up like clips from the movie and like behind the scenes photos and all sorts of stuff on our Instagram. And man, I got some crazy stuff too. Like, I took pictures at every single shoot. I got people hanging out behind the scenes. I got different rappers that would show up, like, you know, one guy would show up early, the other guy would show up late, and all of a sudden I'd have Razkaz and Terminology and Sean Price all hanging out. I'd be like, hey boy, click, click, you know, like, I got some
Nice.
crazy ass stuff, man.
Thank you, Frank. Really good stuff, man.
Take it easy.
All right.
All right.